Hello art lovers, it's Gazza Miller here. Today I'm going to do a tutorial on how to create a quick and easy loose watercolour sketch. I'm going to focus on doing a little Irish house in the county of Cork, and in particular illustrating the front door and an associated window. It's a very simple little subject that I've chosen, but what I will attempt to do is show the full range of techniques and applications to this little subject, and these techniques and applications can be used universally, whether you're doing a very simple watercolor of a simple item like a duck or a cow, whether you're doing a cottage, or whether you're doing a very complex landscape. All of these techniques can be used on those particular subjects. In today's tutorial, I won't be doing an exhaustive commentary as I did in my previous tutorial, where I illustrated a little Irish country cottage near the sea. In this particular episode, I'll let my pen and paintbrush do the talking for me most of the time, and I'll just add some commentary where I think it's important. So the first phase is creating a pen sketch of the subject. The paper that I'm using is a 300 grams watercolor paper. It's got a heavy texture and it's an A4 size, which is around about 12 inches by 8 and a bit inches. The pen that I'll be using to do the drawing is, it's a waterproof pen. That's the most important thing. It's a fine liner pen and it's about 0.6 in size. But the most important thing is that it is waterproof, because when you go putting the watercolor over it, if you don't use waterproof ink, it will blur and it will bleed and it will generally look pretty ugly. Now, as you can see in the video, I'm using a reference photograph, and I've printed the photograph on my desktop printer around about the size that I'd be doing the drawing. That way it's very easy to replicate the placement of the elements in the subject and approximate their sizes. Don't get too fussy about getting exact sizes. If they're a little bit larger or smaller, it doesn't matter. If they're a bit distorted, it doesn't matter. It's all about just creating a bit of artwork. In fact, sometimes the image or the artwork will look much better if things are a little bit out of scale or a little bit distorted. Now, when I sketch, I like to sketch very quickly. I do that because I like my hand to do most of the thinking rather than overthink it with my brain. I find I get better results that way. They're a bit more fluid, they're a bit more flowing. And I don't get caught up in nitty-gritty detail, which is exactly what I'm not trying to do in this very loose watercolor style of painting and sketching. Now, in this particular instance, I'm going to create a vignette of the image. That's to say that I'm not going to use up the full area of the A4 sheet. I'm going to contain it within a margin of that A4 sheet. And I'm going to try to fade it out towards the edges a little bit. There is no reason that you couldn't sketch and paint out to the edges and fill up the entire sheet. But just in this application, I'm just wanting to focus on the door and the window, and it's almost like I've zoomed in on it. That's the intent. When I'm delineating the image, I'm not trying to get too caught up in intricate detail. What I'm really trying to do is just capture the essence of the subject matter. For instance, the sign above the door, I've just suggested that there are words, there's a name of the cottage or house. I haven't actually accurately delineated them. When it comes to the flowers and so on in the planter box, the window box, once again, it's just a bit of scribble to suggest that they're plants. So what I'm doing is really suggesting how things look rather than accurately drawing them. And this is in keeping with this very loose style of watercolour sketching. My father, who was quite a clever artist, he used a term. The term was studied carelessness. And I like that term. I think it is a great term and really explains or describes what I'm trying to do here. Everything is really careless and suggestive. Now, once the pen sketch is complete, the next phase is the painting phase. And within the painting phase, there are 3 other phases. The first phase of the painting phase is to saturate the A4 sheet with clear, fresh water using a wide paintbrush with very soft bristle hairs. We want to saturate the whole sheet, but we don't want puddles in the sheet. We want just a nice sheen, a nice moist sheen across the surface of the paper. And then we're going to work with that. Now, as far as the brushes go, there's an image that I've put on the video of 3 of the brushes, 3 of the 4 brushes that I've used in this exercise. As you can see it, there's a big, wide, flat brush which has very soft bristles. Then there is a short, flat brush. I think that's a 3/4 size brush. Then there's a smaller brush. I'm not sure what the size of that is, but that's also a flat brush. In addition to that, you'll see in the video a very small pointed brush to allow me to do some very fine detail, but I don't use that very much. In addition to that, there's another brush that I use to try and get some texture on the stonework itself. And that's an oil painting brush that I use, which is a big brush with very, very strong bristles. and I use that in a vertical fashion, dipping it in the paint and stamping it on the image. You'll see what I mean when we get to that point. And the first part of the painting phase is to paint clear fresh water over the entire surface of the A4 sheet. Now, we don't want to have pools or puddles on the A4 sheet. We just want to have a nice sheen across the whole of the surface so that we can work with that. What this is called is wet on wet. So once the initial layer of water is partly absorbed into the paper, we'll then come over the top of that with some watercolour paint and apply that, and you'll notice that it tends to bleed or diffuse, and that's the effect that we want to capture, that loose painting effect. Now, where there are surplus amounts of water, I like to dry them off a little bit using some tissue paper. And that's what I've been doing with that dry brush. Just picking it up off the paper, wiping it across some tissue paper and removing that. That way it tends to contain the paint to the areas that I do only want to paint a certain colour on. There might be a little bit of diffusion, but it's minimal. So it's a controlling technique to control where your paint goes. Now what we're doing here is blocking in layers of colour to the various elements of the composition. Don't go too heavy too quick. It's better to have a light, wash over the first few layers and gradually build them up where you want to have more intensity rather than go dark too quickly, because it's very hard to work with that dark surface to remove it or whatever if you need to after it's been done. So just take your time, build up layer of light layer upon light layer as you go. So first step is really just blocking in the various elements, and then we'll build up on that as we go. You can also use a tissue paper or paper towel. I use a kitchen paper towel to soak up little areas of paint where you want to add some highlights. If you dab it with the tissue paper, you'll remove little bits of paint and they'll give you little differences in tone, creating highlights. As you can see, I'm applying another layer of colour and just gradually building it up till eventually I'll get to the colour that I really want to be the final colour. Don't worry about getting too finicky and trying to keep within the lines that you've drawn. That's not the object here. The object here is to be loose and free. So going outside the lines is actually good, or not even painting up to the lines is really good. The overall idea is to just capture the essence of the subject, not to do a literal interpretation of it. Just let yourself go free and let the paintbrush almost have a mind of its own. You can't make a mistake in this style. There is no such thing as a mistake. Now we're at the final phase of the painting and we're going to create a limited amount of detail. But when I say detail, I mean that in a very loose fashion. Once again, we're trying to be more suggestive rather than make an accurate depiction of what we're seeing in the photographic image. After all, the whole idea of this style of painting is not to create a literal interpretation of a photograph or an in situ plein air type scenario. So I hope this little video has been of some benefit to you, that if you are thinking about taking up watercolour sketching, that this might give you the confidence to start, or if you already have taken up watercolour sketching, that this might give you another way of looking at it. It's just a fun way to paint. As I said earlier, you can't make a mistake. It's just pure fun like we used to have when we were kids back at daycare or kindergarten. So don't be afraid of it. Just have fun with it. That's the whole thing. The last thing to do, of course, is to sign off your wonderful piece of artwork that you've created. Alrighty then. Catch you next time. Cheers. Gazza Miller.